Last month, London saw the world premiere of Andrew Lloyd Webber's new musical, The Phantom of the Opera.
Beneath the opera house, I know is there. He's with me on the stage, he's everywhere.
It was greeted by many critics as a triumph. It confirmed that Lloyd Webber, at only 38, is the most successful British composer of musicals ever. He's written 7 major hit musicals and is the only composer to have had 3 shows running simultaneously in the West End and on Broadway.
Beneath the opera house, I know is there. He's with me on the stage.
Our programme tells the story of the career that led to Phantom and begins in New York last May with Lloyd Webber at work with the show's director Hal Prince and the lyricist Charles Hart.
Then Christine comes back. And then the tune on its own. Upstage, and then here she is.
He was a very difficult baby. He never needed any sleep at all.
I was at a dance when she caught my eye.
The only way to keep him quiet was to get up oneself and put on Edmundo Ross very softly.
Began to dance.
And then he was perfectly happy. He jumped about in time to the music. Hours, literally hours on end.
Never let her go. Blame it on the bossa nova with its magic spell. Blame it on the bossa nova that she did so well. Oh, it all began with just one little dance. Soon it
Must have been the noisiest household there's ever been. I mean, my father would be practicing. He had a piano fitted out especially with pedals, of course he was an organist. And so he'd be playing away in one room or composing or something. I'd be scratching away on the cello and Andrew would be banging something out on the piano. It was bedlam in there, you know. I'm surprised we weren't all thrown out.
I had a toy theatre that I built at home. I used to bore the family by staging musicals which were based on every subject from sort of Macbeth to the importance of being earnest. And were all frightful.
He created the most extraordinary theatre, really. He used an old turntable from the record player for a revolving stage. And then he went round all the various local shops which sold materials and got all kinds of samples, which were used as backcloths and curtains and scenery and things.
Really, it was like, it was a complete fantasy world. You know, we had, I remember that the whole floor there was just covered in these things, and we built buildings, and people would go to work, and there were trains, and people would get on them, there'd be rush hours, and everything. It was great. But it was really, I suppose it was pure theatre.
My father very sweetly arranged for a guy from what was in those days called the music teacher to his magazine to come and hear one of these terrible performances. The net result of it was that there was a piece of music of mine published called The Toy Theatre. I think I was just 9. and I've lost it. So I don't know if there are any good tunes in there, because it could be useful. But anyway, this thing appeared, and that was really the sort of beginning of my getting into the theatre.
I don't understand why you let the things you did get so out of hand. You'd have managed better if you'd had it planned. Now why'd you choose such a backward time in such a strange land? You'd come today, you could have reached the whole nation. Israel in 4 BC had no mass communication. Does it get me wrong? Does it get me wrong? Does it get me wrong? Does it get me wrong?
Well, my father, when I was a kid, he was the director at that time of composition at the Royal College of Music, or the senior professor there, and then he was appointed to the London College of Music as director. But my father really wasn't an academic man at all, although he had that. He had this other side to him, which was, I think, underestimated in his own life, that he was a composer. There's a piece of his music coming out very shortly called Aurora, which has been recorded for the first time. And it's burgeoning with real melody.
His father also had this tremendous sense of melody. Andrew's inherited that from Bill, I'm sure of it.
When you want to leave, don't call me at 3 a.m. From a friend's apartment, I'd like to choose how I hear you. Take me to a park that's covered with trees. Tell me on a Sunday, please.
In 1965, Andrew Lloyd Webber met Tim Rice and decided to leave Oxford University after only 1 term to devote himself to writing musicals.
I remember the first time I met him going to his flat, and he sat down and said, I've written 8 musicals in my school days. And he played me extracts from various scores, and I remember thinking, this guy's going to make it. This is a red-hot certainty.
I remember him. I remember vividly the first time I met him, and he was very, very tall. And I hope he won't mind me saying, actually very pretty. And he was always very good-looking and was always the one who got the girls. And still is. But Timothy had this extraordinary way with words, and it was like something that I'd never, ever heard before or seen before in any of my studies of musicals. He would rhyme in a way that anybody else at that time would have said, how dare you? How dare you do that? In fact, the first lyric he ever brought to me was for a song about an auction, in which it was a musical about Dr. Bernardo that luckily never got on stage. But the very, very first Rice lyric was the auctioneer saying, here I have a lovely parrot, sound in wind and limb. I can guarantee that there is nothing wrong with him.
And for 2 or 3 years, we were hawking it around with various agents and publishers trying to get it put on somewhere, but nothing happened. And the first thing we did that had any success was Joseph.
Do you remember those wonderful parties? The splendor of Canaan's cuisine, an extravagant, elegant soirée. funny, but since we lost Joseph.
The first performance of Joseph was at a school concert in spring 1968. Neither Lloyd Webber nor Rice had any idea what this 20-minute piece would lead to.
No one comes to dinner now. We'd only eat them anyhow. I even find I'm missing Joseph's dreams. Those little days we used to know. Where have they gone? Where did they go? They carried your
We started something that we didn't even know would go into the theatre. It was never written for the theatre. It was really only written for this end-of-term concert.
May I return to the beginning. The light is dimming, and the dream is true. The world and I, we are still waiting, still hesitating. Any dream will do.
What we hit on, I think, was the way of being able to tell a story in a straight line through music and words without dialogue. It emerged as the album that was the first thing that really, I suppose, got a lot of attention. But it didn't do well. I mean, it didn't make the charts or anything like that. It was a piece that brought us to the attention of one or two people and was, in a sense, a great calling card.
I listened to this and I thought it was brilliant. It was melodic, it was new, it was something that, there was nothing like it around, at the time.
David Land is an agent entrepreneur, one of whose claim to fame was the Dagenham Girl Pipers, who he'd taken all around the world. Enormous success, they played Vegas and everything. And he heard the Joseph album.
Well, David has been a supportive friend and godfather over the years. He's the one who tends to come up with my boys just made 300 million quid off this or whatever. I mean, he is the origin of most of those sort of quotes. He may deny it, but he is.
You can't sort of stand over a composer or a writer with a stick. In fact, I remember to this day that I forget the sum total involved. We can work it out, 3,000 a year to each of them for 3 years is £18,000. Andrew just left sort of smugly and said to me, do you realise we just signed a deal for £18,000. We need not write a note of music.
We had a 3-year deal, during which time we were meant to be writing like mad, and they would take a percentage of anything we wrote during that time. And in effect, it meant we had 3 years to make it. And within, I think, about 12 months, we came up with Jesus Christ Superstar.
Every time I look at you, I don't understand why you let the things you did get so out of hand. You'd have managed better if you'd had it planned. Now why'd you choose such a backward time in such a strange land? If you'd come today, you could have reached the whole nation. Israel in 4 BC had no mass communication.
Don't get me wrong.
Don't you 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 get me wrong.
Only wanna know.
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 The basic theme, I remember I wrote it in a restaurant in Fulham. I rushed in and kind of put it down on a table napkin. I say I mean, gosh, nothing is more simple than that. I mean, how many hundreds and hundreds of pieces, that you play on the piano have that in it? But it is that thing of being able to take it on, and that once you've got that, the grandeur of it is what I think made it happen. But again, I think originally, if I remember rightly, Tim and I thought that it might become a kind of the theme of a follow-up to Joseph. And I can't even, was it not, I think it might even called Samuel or something.
I'd for years wanted to write something about Judas Iscariot, who I thought was a very interesting character. And I'm sure that the artistic success of Joseph encouraged us to go along that route. And nobody, even David Land, who will admit this, thought it was that good an idea commercially. They thought, religion, forget it. The kids aren't interested, and adults certainly won't be interested in a rock musical about Jesus Christ.
Oh, you don't know the opposition that we had. I say through the Variety Club, and also through a personal friend of mine. I play cards with Lou Gray. He said to me, mucking around with a subject of that description, you want your bloody brains testing.
Everybody thought we were crazy when we submitted a musical about Jesus Christ for production. And the number of people in London, can be counted on the hands of many more than mine.
Who turned it down?
Who just turned it down. I mean, but nobody was really keen. And in the end, we had to go, if you like, the Joseph route and write it as an oratorio. And we got it recorded that way.
I don't know how to love him, what to do, how to move him. I've been changed, yes, really changed. In these past few days, when I've seen myself, I seem like someone else.
It was originally a song that Andrew and I wrote as a pop song, and I thought one of the ways to get a pop hit was to write a song that mentioned an American place name in the title. I called it Kansas Morning. Well, it went something like this. I love the Kansas morning, Kansas mist at my window, Kansas winds shift and sigh. I can see you now, we're flying high, Kansas love of mine. And it goes on and on about people being locked up in jail. It's quite terrible.
Should I bring him down? Should I scream and shout? Should I speak of love? Let my feelings out. I've never known I'd come to this. What's it all about?
When we came to write Jesus Christ Superstar, we wanted a big love ballad to be sung by Mary Magdalene. This wonderful tune Andrew had written, which had so far been totally wasted, was discussed, and we both thought it would be crazy not to use it because it was such a great tune. And this time around, I wrote a good lyric, and it became a huge success, both in and out of the show.
I turn my head, I'd back away. I wouldn't want to know. He scares me so. Don't know how to love him. What to do, how to move him. I've been changed, yes, really changed. In these past few days, when I've seen myself, I wouldn't want to know. He scares me so.
It got quite good reviews in England as a record, but it had no commercial success whatsoever. And what happened was, of course, that the Americans discovered it, and it went through the roof in America.
Consequently, we were in the unique position of having a hit score without a show. So it was natural, as the record hadn't been very successful in England, to do the show on Broadway first, because there was a big demand. As it happened, the Broadway show wasn't very good, partly because I think it was difficult living up to the great success of the album, and partly it just wasn't very good. And it wasn't until we came to London, the show was an enormous success, much bigger success than the show was on Broadway. And in London, it was the right way round. The show sold the album, whereas in America, we did it the wrong way round.
Tim and I certainly didn't know America, but with hindsight, of course, it's so easy to spot. The, in quotes, Jesus Revolution was happening at the time. Records like Spirit in the Sky had been huge successes there. Everybody thought this was the great breakthrough of young people talking about religion. Of course, they'd reckoned with about Tim and I, because what Tim and I thought we were doing was writing a story in a new way, and we were not really approaching it from a religious point of view.
Jesus,
don't think I'd have ever been quite as, or now, if I was doing it, I don't think I'd ever be quite so crude, if you like, with some of the things. But I think Gethsemane, you see, that's a nice, very nice theme. And I mean, that does work very well for its mood. And I think the song I'm most pleased with, in a way, is Everything's All Right, which is, I like that because it's in 5. Very much the sort of me in a way. I mean, the sort of the slightly modal things. There are beginnings there.
Andrew Lloyd Webber's often found ways to make popular music from classical roots. He did this to great effect in Variations, written for his brother, Julian.
There have been an awful lot of pieces written lately in rock music particularly that are very much studio albums that have been put together perhaps even by, in some cases, 1 or 2 or 3 musicians, and just them overdubbing and overdubbing and overdubbing, building the thing up like a layer cake. What I set out to do when I wrote this piece was to write something that 6 or 7 musicians could actually take somewhere and perform without it being absolutely impossible to recreate without tapes and all that sort of thing.
I mean, it's one of his most light-hearted pieces. There are serious moments in it, but I don't like the word serious anyway in relation to classical music, really. But I think it's an important addition. I mean, I know I'm on record as saying that I think personally it's the best piece of cello music since Benjamin Britten, which isn't quite as sweeping a statement as it sounds. As you know, the last Britten piece was written about 71, Variations was 77. But it's a major addition. It's a gift to the cellist, this piece. I mean, obviously, it starts with a tune that everybody knows. But then he wrote some really beautiful lyrical bits, like, you know... those sort of tunes, and you know... writing tunes like that for the cello now. It's great to play it, but then of course he used the cello in a more percussive way as well. This sort of, you know,
Lloyd Webber's music always seems to end up in the theatre. Variations was used for a ballet and became the second half of Song and Dance, starring Wayne Sleep. The first part of Song and Dance is a set of songs telling the story of a single girl in New York. It was called Tell Me on a Sunday and was originally performed by Marty Webb.
I don't want to fight day and night, bad enough you're going. Don't leave in silence with no word at all. Don't get drunk and slam the door. That's no way to end this. I know how I want you to say goodbye. Find a circus ring, flying flatly.
Which is fine. It was, nice, and it sounded lovely on the record, but it never, ever got off the ground in the theatre and produced the emotional reaction that I wanted. And one day I realised, of course, is that why it is it goes... And it needs something else there, you see. Took the roof off the building the first time we did it.
Don't run off in the pouring rain. Don't call me as they call your plane. Take the hurt out of all the pain. Take me to her arms that's covered with trees. Tell me on a Sunday, please.
But it was interesting, what really transformed Tell Me on a Sunday as a piece was to use the tune that was in fact the second tune in the original variations, this one. Which I think is one of my personal favourites of everything. And that shows an example of how melody can be changed. Because when I first wrote it, it was... And my little daughter was going... And she suddenly went, and I thought, hang on. And I think that one of the things that I think distinguishes, whether or not you actually do know how to write a melody or not, is sometimes to actually have the ear for something that most people would not listen to. I mean, it can be a stray sound. It can be going along a street in a car horn and you're thinking of a tune and it suddenly hits a note you never thought of, and you say, hang on, that actually works. That's a phrase that sticks in the mind.
I have never felt like this. For once I'm lost for words. Your smile has really thrown me. This is not like me at all. I never thought I'd know the kind of love you've shown me. Now, no matter where I am, no matter what I do, I see your face appearing like an unexpected song that only we are hearing.
It's not been roses all the way for Lloyd Webber. Sometimes the critics have been savage, and his third show flopped.
There is no format. There's no question about it. One of the greatest combinations of all time, Alan Ayckbourn, who's won everything except the Grand National, and Andrews won the Grand National, and they wrote Jeeves. And to me, I still think the music is wonderful. I think the lyrics, the story's very good. It just, you see, it doesn't work.
Failure because it didn't work as a musical. There can be bits and pieces within a musical that are good and work, even though the whole doesn't work. And there were, and indeed are, one or two pieces in Jeeves that I think do work, and it's one of the very few scores that, in a sense, I've buried, that I haven't pillaged, because one day I would quite like to see if anything could be done with it, but I have a feeling that the central notion of it is too soft, really, and doesn't quite work. And certainly we didn't get over any of the affection that certainly I had for that material in the show. It just didn't work. We didn't get any of that kind of rather sort of cozy English show business quality in it at all. Maybe I'm just not capable of writing that sort of thing, but it's not there.
What's the difference between writing a string of very good songs and writing a musical? I mean, how would you describe that difference?
Well, the difference is that, in fact, a musical is not a series of songs in isolation. And if you say take an album like Sgt. Pepper that was tried to be staged as a musical and was a complete disaster, you can see the difference immediately because they don't really have any relation to each other. And when that was done in New York, I mean, it really lasted very small number of performances because it just didn't hang together. I think you see the great change that's happened since the sort of 40s, 50s, where really musicals still were making the charts consistently. I even remember that a flop musical by Rodgers and Hammerstein was not a flop, but not a well-known one. Flower Drum Song was #1 in Billboard. And I think that the thing is that once the Elvis and the Beatles got together and they got on and one began to see that pop was emerging, an awful lot of young people thought, let's not do musicals anymore because it's no longer the way to become successful songwriters. And they decided that they would write for pop. Look at all the people who did write for pop, some of whom now have tried to come back and do musicals. But once Elvis was away, it's very interesting that there are very, very few writers who then decided exclusively to do musical theatre. You can really only name 3 or 4, probably Marvin Hamlish, you would say, although he has a career outside. Charlie Strauss, you can certainly say, and of course you can say Sondheim. But there aren't a lot, and that's over a long period of time.
Don't cry for me, Argentina.
I just heard a radio program about Eva Peron in my car by chance and thought it was a great story. And the more I researched this story, the more intrigued I became, and the more fascinated by Eva Peron I became.
Well, it was an idea clearly that Tim felt very passionately about, and it did seem to me that it had one wonderful theatrical moment immediately, which was something that I actually saw, which I thought one would be able to do, which was the way that you could take one, I suppose, piece of material that in a sense became your anthem, your theme tune, your song, and twist it against somebody. I saw that happen to Judy Garland when she did a performance in the Talk of the Town, and this wrecked lady trying to do Over the Rainbow, having been 50 minutes late for an audience that basically were throwing coins at her. I mean, it's as simple as that. And it was an extraordinary and devastating theatrical sight. And she just didn't go on. And she just said, I'm sorry, and that was it. And I thought, well, there is a notion here that one could use something that would become an anthem for this woman and then use it throughout the evening and then somehow turn it against her at the end.
Do you think it's a more theatrical song than anything you've written previously, that one?
No, I don't. But it's set up in a way which is good fun. I mean, there was once an unkind critic who, I don't know whether to take this as a compliment or not, who said that, with that theatrical setup, you could do Three Blind Mice and still bring the show down. I mean, you more or less could. It's absolutely built to the moment where she does come on. I mean, it's all of the oldest theatrical things you can do. It's Cinderella coming to the ball, it's Eliza going to the ball, it's, and in she appears having suddenly become the First Lady. What I liked about it was the possibility that we could then change her mood, and suddenly seeing that she'd won with the crowd with a soft sell, that she could suddenly become the vicious, sort of almost Little Vixen, if you like. It's a very manipulative piece of theatre writing.
This is when they're humming. Okay. Way up. The more eyes you can lock with in the orchestra, in the stalls, the more people you can get on the front row of the dress circle.
Evita was Lloyd Webber's first collaboration with the best producer of musicals in the USA, Hal Prince. And the show made a star of Elaine Page.
Go back just a tiny bit.
Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is, I never left you. All through my wild days, my magic I kept my promise. Don't keep your distance. And as for fortune, and as for fame, I never invited them in. Though it seemed to the world they were all I desired.
In its day, it was 4.5 minutes long, which for certainly in the pop element, which is where we all first knew this song, that was extraordinary, and it was a ballad. So to have a ballad that was 4.5 minutes long was pretty unusual. I also think that the title caught everyone's imagination.
Don't cry for me, Argentina.
What is very important to me when you're doing a play is that you should understand why people are singing, what they're singing about, and how that interacts, and where the tension's coming from, and why you should stick with the story. And there are places where rock numbers with lyrics that are indecipherable just simply don't help your story. They make an image, they make something happen right away, but then then they leave you high and dry, right where you started. And in fact, with a musical, you want to move into the next place in the show, having learned something. And if you're singing everything, then by God, those songs have to move you forward while they're being sung. In the old days, really a long time ago, songs didn't do that at all. I mean, some everybody's favorite old musicals, where they came out and sang lovely Gershwin tunes, but the book, in fact, moved you somewhere, and then the song was, "Oh, sweet and lovely lady, be good," but didn't take you anywhere, and you got to the end of that song, you were right where you were when you started. That's not as acceptable to people anymore. They think it would be, but it isn't.
The combination of Lloyd Webber's theatrical music and Prince's brilliant staging are clearly seen in the number Perron's Latest Flame, which deals with the opposition of two groups, the army and the aristocracy, to the rise of Eva Perron.
Dangerous days. We have allowed ourselves to steer. We have completely lost the grip. We have declined to an all-time low. Touch has become the step to.
We had a lot of fun with it because there was an opportunity with the little section which goes... come up with lots of drum rhythms that we played against the choreography.
The evidence suggests she has all an interest in the term of using it. Is exceptionally dead.
We were able to sort of conceive then something that they was moved across the stage and slightly just missed. I think it was good fun to do.
Dangerous days.
This has really been your year, Miss Duarte. Tell us where you go from here, Miss Duarte. Which are the roads that you yearn to play? Whom did you sleep and dine with yesterday?
Is that the extent of your interest in me? It shows how futile acting must be.
Can we assume then that you quit? Is this because of your association with Colonel Perron? Night and
She won't speak of happy by her nights on the tiles. She says it's because he must be not taking trial. So get back on to the string. She should get into her head. She should not get out of bed. She should know that she must wait. To be loud or to be late. The evidence suggests she has all the interest in the term of using him. She's exceptionally dead.
I didn't think everything was quite right in it, but it seemed to me to be tackling a subject very seriously that perhaps had not been, up to that time, considered in any way something you might do. I think Evita paved the way for quite a lot more things than perhaps we realized at the time. Is at the time when you write a show, you don't necessarily think, hey, I'm breaking new ground.
But looking back, what new ground do you think you might have broken in Evita?
I think that the only real new ground probably we broke within, as it were, that era of popular musical theatre was trying to do that kind of subject and trying to do something that was, even if it wasn't 100% successful, being done in a serious way and using the operatic form.
But there was still a feeling in the 70s that it wasn't possible for Britain to produce a musical, that British musicals were like the British Weather or whatever other crack the Americans could think of. And now, as we sit here talking now, there are 17 musicals running in the West End, most of them British. Why has there been such a big turnaround in 10 years?
Well, I think the view that the English couldn't write musicals and the British couldn't perform them is probably even more important, persisted right through into the 80s. Even when Evita happened, there were a fair smattering of critics who said that the only reason it was a success, ignoring the fact that it had been a #1 album and single, was due to an American Viz Hal Prince, who admittedly did one of the finest productions I think anybody could have ever have hoped for at any time of their piece. But I think it's taken a while. Now, why? I don't know. I mean, I remember at birth one was practically told that the British couldn't do a musical, and there was no way that we could. It was self-evidently nonsense. I think you see it's to do with what your expectation of the musical might be. I suppose that the British perhaps are not so good But again, even now we've caught up even in the area of sort of pizzazz and all of that. But I think we possibly would not have done a 42nd Street as well as Broadway would do. But equally so, we have been the people who have taken much more exciting and more left field subjects. And we also now have the performers, which was our biggest letdown before. This is that we didn't really have in depth the people who could really act and sing and dance. And the fact that there's been such a huge turnaround in those performers, the fact that when the dance explosion happened in England, very late, of course, but in 1978, the fact that that happened suddenly turned a whole lot of much younger people on to the idea of being in musicals. And now I think we have possibly as fine a collection of performers as anybody could ever wish for.
A campaign run against you in Private Eye about plagiarism and borrowing. How do you react to that? What do you say about this?
Well, what can you say, really? I mean, I know it's nonsense, and I know what I am, where I write from, and it really does tend to be from here. There are going to be moments where, whatever you do, I mean, there are only so many notes on the piano. I mean, gosh, there are many tunes, I mean, I saw a whole campaign in America run against Stephen Sondheim about that, and saying, this, that, and the other, and anybody can do that.
Have you ever consciously borrowed a tune from somebody else?
No, I have definitely come up with one that I would have wished I hadn't, but I never consciously did it.
Which one was that?
I'm not telling you.
I think Andrew's greatest musical idiosyncrasy is that he writes a jolly good melody, which is more than a lot of people do. He seems to have the gift of writing a tune that you think you know how it's going to go, and then at the last minute there's a kink which makes it different. Memory is a very good example, where it suddenly goes out of time. Da-ba-da-ba-da-da-da-da.
In the lamplight, the withered leaves collect at my feet, and the wind begins to mourn. Time I knew what happiness was, let the memory live again.
I remember when I first wrote Memory, and it is very Puccini-esque. I'm going to have to, be honest about it, primarily because it was written for something which was a notion that I had about a musical about the writing of La Bohème. And I remember when I first came up with it, and I thought, well, what do I do? And I did actually go and play it to 2 or 3 people, the last of whom was my father. And I said, does this sound like anything to you? He said, yes, it sounds like $5 million. extraordinary situation, you see, because it was an unknown producer in Cameron Mackintosh, and therefore it was my first venture without Robert Stigwood. It was an unknown director in musical theatre terms in Trevor Nunn, who everybody thought was somebody from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and what could he possibly know, with a whole load of poems by a poet. I mean, the list was endless. Most, of course,
and dance, which you've never written
dance,
before.
And that's an important reason why I came to write the piece, was because it was just some short time after the, I suppose, what you might call dance explosion in England, and I'd never really written. There was a bit of dancing in Evita, but I'd never really written for dance, and was very intrigued by it. It was in a theatre, of course, the New London Theatre, that was considered to be the no-go disaster zone of all time, and there was a lot of tutting about poor Andrew, and he's off his head.
I think Andrew Lloyd Webber has produced some very interesting shows and some not so interesting shows. Whether there's a straight progression from the uninteresting to the interesting is debatable. In some ways, some of the earlier shows, or middle shows, if you will, Jesus Christ Superstar and Evita, are more interesting than some of what's come after, particularly in the cases of Starlight Express and Cats, which are sort of amorphous pageants and don't have the sophisticated ambitions of Jesus Christ or Evita. With Phantom of the Opera, Lloyd Webber is again sort of taking another twist in his progression, because he's returning to the kind of storytelling he did in the earlier shows. But throughout his career, he's really been held hostage by his lyricists. If a composer is working with unsophisticated lyrics, he's in trouble. The most sophisticated lyricist, in my view, of Lloyd Webber's career has been Tim Rice. And while Evita may in some ways be a naive and simplistic historical view of the Perrons, as show business lyric writing, Rice's work is very clever, and I think Lloyd Webber responded with a more interesting score and more varied score than usual. On the other hand, when the lyrics are weaker, he's in trouble. It's hard for any composer to do much with a lyric like "Freight is great."
Starlight Express tells the story of a race between railway trains. It was directed by Trevor Nunn, with a roller skating cast and a battery of special effects. Several critics said that the spectacle swamped the story.
This is a light-hearted off-centre piece that was produced, in my view, and that just shows you that perhaps you don't get these things right far too expensively for its own good. I mean, much better off it had been done in the Roundhouse or somewhere. Probably it's unstageable anyway, and what Trevor did with it is probably the only way you could stage it, so I don't want what I'm saying to be misinterpreted, because, look, it's a success, and it's going to New York, and it'll be a success there, I'm quite sure. I'd be very, very stupid, and I would not be being honest if I put up a great bravura front and said that I think that it's the most important piece of musical theatre that ever happened, and that it was intended to change the course of the Western world as we know it, because it was not. It's a fun piece. It was my rock and roll side coming out, you know, that I thought, oh, let's do a fun thing and not worry about whether or not it gets good or bad reviews, and just do it. But it's just too expensively produced for my taste.
Starlight Express, like Cats and the Phantom of the Opera, began modestly. They were first tried out in his own small theatre at his home in Berkshire, and it's here that he's working on the piece which has reunited him with Tim Rice, a musical about cricket.
Is my fate to sit hopelessly by? in the shade till his retirement.
My dear, I could not help but overhear your heartfelt plea. To solve your grim dilemma, take the bit between your teeth. If cricket doesn't satisfy you, turn to higher things. May I suggest just switch allegiance to the sport of kings? My glamour world of racing offers all you missed today. Sophistication, pounding oot, girls participate. From Epsom.
The message came that one of the royal family had phoned up Andrew and said, could you write a song for my mum? And he actually got together with Tim, and they came up with a short musical that they had thoughts on before. And would you like to play the baddie in it? I thought it was a wind-up, because it didn't, I mean, will you write a song for my mum? It just sounded a bit over the top. And then I went down to see them all, and of course they said to me, we start rehearsing on Friday, and we're actually doing it on Wednesday.
Is my fate to sit hopelessly by?
I'm the odd one out from the cricketers. They're the local gentry, in a way, all in their whites, and I'm the typical sporty type that goes to the races all the time.
Come with me to a course. My box awaits, champagne's on ice, the limousine is booked. I'll give you 6 to 4, then you'll be well and truly hooked. The sport of kings.
Perhaps he's right. I need to break free.
Clearly, Andrew Lloyd Webber has a huge talent for anticipating public taste, but it's not a cynical one. He's not pandering to the public as a Hollywood executive might. He hasn't found a formula and stuck to it, otherwise he'd be doing the 15th biblical musical by now. Instead, he's picked incredibly varied topics, from the Bible to trains to cats to a single woman's odyssey in New York to a horror tale such as Phantom of the Opera right now. The question raised by his career, however, is whether his music and the format of his music varies as much as the subjects of his shows. Stephen Sondheim, the foremost American composer of musicals, also picks eclectic subject matter, but there's no confusing the score of Sweeney Todd for the score of Little Night Music. In the case of Lloyd Webber, you could possibly confuse the scores because there is this artistic sameness. You could take a song such as Music of the Night from Phantom of the Opera and put it in Cats, and take Memory from Cats and put it in Phantom of the Opera, and one wonders if the audience would know the difference.
I have tried really a lot of things. I mean, even a very small-scale subject in Tell Me on a Sunday that became the song part of Song and Dance, and you can't get much smaller than one woman occupying a stage for an hour. And then in a way that was kind of a reaction to the huge subjects of an Evita or the dimension of a story like Superstar. No, I really find theatrical ideas in really a lot of things. I could give you 5 ideas at the moment that I think could be made marvelous musicals. Whether they can be, of course, depends on one other crucial ingredient, and that's collaboration and who you have around you.
Oh, which of those, just for fun, what are those 5 ideas?
Well, let me give you the 2 most ridiculously opposite one. One I talked about before, which is to do Aspects of Love, which is a book by David Garnett, which is a sort of latter-day Bloomsbury set book, and about a sort of rather delicate area of sort of English, slightly literary life, 1940s sort of ish. The other is to do a musical about an American game show. Both are wonderfully theatrical ideas.
When the money keeps rolling in, you don't ask how.
One of the great things about Andrew Lloyd Webber, he calls them has good little wheeze for something. He is a master of marketing.
Open up the doors, never been a fun like the foundation, never broke.
Lloyd Webber's sustained success is based on his undeniable musical and theatrical talent. It also owes something to his marketing and his flair for publicity.
Andrew's only got a birth, and it's a top-selling record. Everybody at least will put it out.
Write your name and your dream on a card or a pad or a ticket.
His work is excellent, but his marketing is wonderful.
She will change your way of life for 2 whole weeks at least.
A day doesn't go by without Tim or Andrew appearing in the newspapers with something. If it's not Tim emulating W.G. Grace on the cricket field, it's Andrew buying up another county.
It must be unusual for Latin, I expect unique for Latin, to get into the charts. But I believe that the profound sentiments of a requiem come through any language.
Was Requiem, in a straightforward sense, a bid to be, after having had a hugely popular theatrical musical run, a bid to be, as it were, taken seriously? Was there any of that element in it?
I don't think any composer sits down to say, I'm deliberately going to do this because it looks good if I follow this here or the other. But of course, what did happen for me was something that most composers never get the luck to do. Cats changed my life. Up until that time, you know, I'd done fine out of music, but not as well as I think probably everybody thought. Cats came at a time when it was possible to actually keep a little bit of the money that one actually earned if one was a UK person living in this country. And I had this extraordinary, and something of success one probably will never ever be able to repeat again, and finished Starlight, which was a piece that I'd written in embryo. That actually I started in 1971. I got my first draft, I think, next door. That was done. And I thought, hey, I can take 16 months off now and write something that maybe nobody will ever perform. And I did. And in fact, I submitted it to two conductors who both turned it down. And finally to Laurent Marzel, who said he'd like to give it a whirl. And I had no means of knowing whether my score would ever be heard. I mean, to put them together like that, it's just lovely. I mean, it's a combination the Everly Brothers did. But yeah, I'd love to hear the Everly Brothers do PAAs one of these days. But these dreams, you know, one can live and hope. It's funny, it shows the way that sometimes you get a subject offered to you that you don't think is a very good idea, and then somebody persuades you that it is, and you look at it again. I mean, I was offered The Phantom really as something to produce, and I thought of it as one of those sort of slightly campy stories that, you know, one thinks of, you know, the sort of movies with people's printed acid being thrown over the face or something like that, and I thought maybe it'd be quite fun, something that I could do with Cameron Mackintosh or something, and I never thought that it would be a subject for me to tackle as a composer, but then we went to see a director who we were going to approach to do the venture, and he said, "You're crazy, you should do it. Don't you realize that it's one of the great love stories of all time?" And I thought, no way, no way. And then as happens, luck, I saw the book in New York for 25 cents in a bookstore, and I bought it. I thought, I might as well have a copy of the old thing and read it and see how different it is, if it is different. And it's very different. I mean, it's one of those wonderful opportunities for a composer because it's not a masterpiece. It's got some very terrific things in it, but it's about something, and I think I've been able to fashion it into something anyway that is very different to anything that has been seen based on that subject really before. I mean, yes, it does have this sort of slight overtone of the Penny Dreadful there in places, because yes, the Phantom of the Opera does kill, but he kills for love. And the piece really is about somebody who, through a physical deformity that he was born with, was unable to express himself and could never express himself to particularly a young girl singer who he's tremendously in love with and who he writes music for. Hears it, and then of course it's sung by the girl again, and his jealousy takes over, and that's the reason why he drops the chandelier. And I mean, so yes, I mean, I suppose it's romantic in the sense that I suppose it's veering more towards what people would probably call grand opera rather than anything that's small. But again, I mean, it doesn't mean to say that it's all very diatonic, because it isn't. I mean, some of the most passionate music in the whole piece sort of sounds much this sort of way. Cut through in sort of very expansive line.
Now look, before we start, bear this in mind. The whole first section of this is an opera.
Yeah. Hal Prince has collaborated again with Lloyd Webber on The Phantom of the Opera. It stars Michael Crawford as the Phantom and Sarah Brightman, Lloyd Webber's wife, as Christine.
So what you want to do is, let's be brave. Go too far. It's attitudes. It's bigger. When you take her by the arms, really, you know, it's big stuff. Mm-hmm. And then, when you find out who this man is, then it goes back to naturalism. And then you begin to really... And then when he breaks and sings his ballad, all of that becomes very real. It'll be realer if everything's very unreal preceding it. Mm-hmm. Not risible, but stylish.
Mm-hmm. Past the point of no return, no looking back now. The games we played till now are at an end. Past the thought of it away, no use resisting, abandon thought and let the dream descend. What raging fire shall flood the soul? What rich desire unlocks its door? What sweet seduction lies before us? Past the point of no return, the final threshold. What woman spoken secrets will we learn beyond the point of no return?
You can trace a quite clear development of themes and ideas from Joseph right through to Phantom. And Phantom is the most luscious expression of this. Do you think that this marks the end of something?
I can't see that one could kind of do anything which is much sort of higher romantic theatre than the Phantom. I can't see that there's much further to go in that particular avenue. I don't really know what I will do next. I mean, I want to take stock of quite a lot of things at the moment. I realise that in fact, there are no, for example, suites of Cats or Evita or Superstar. They've never been done. And I'd quite like to do them myself and get back to doing orchestrations again, which is something that with you're doing a show, you find that you really do start to farm out. And I'd quite like to kind of go back over some of my older things. And then I know something will emerge soon.
Speech disappears into silence, silence. I come here, only knowing the reason why. In my mind I've already imagined a body's entwining, defenseless and silent, and now I am here with you, no second thought. I've decided, past the point of no return, no going back now, our passion play has now at last begun. Right or wrong, one final question, how long should we wait before we want? When will the blood begin to race, the sleeping bud burst into bloom? When will the flames at last consume us? Past the point of no return, the final threshold, the rage is crossed, so stand and watch it burn. We pass the point of no share with me one love, one lifetime. Lead me, save me from my solitude.